Hello there. We are back with another prototyping mini-series, this time taking a look at Facebook's Origami. In this first part, and that's this very own episode that you are watching, I'll start by telling you what Origami and Quartz Composer are, how they work, and the very basics of the tool. And in part 2, already available, we'll put that knowledge into action by building a simple iOS app prototype. Okay, so Origami is a product from Facebook that extends the functionality of Quartz Composer, a tool developed by Apple. So we should start there, right? So Quartz Composer is a node-based visual programming language provided as part of the Xcode development environment in OS X for processing and rendering graphical data, released around 2005. So keep in mind that this is a 10-year-old tool with little to no active development by Apple's part throughout the years. And I'll come to this in a while. Now, Quartz programming through Quartz Composer works by implementing and connecting patches. So it's all very visual, but by no means an easy tool. So if this was released 10 years ago, why aren't designers talking about it since then, right? That's a good question. Interaction design and prototyping is somewhat new to the design process, and probably you can argument that it's because software and hardware only now can keep up and match our ambitions, right? Or you can say that's because the whole flat design language suddenly gave designers the room to breathe and to explore other ways to delight and inject life in their UIs. As I mentioned on the Prototyping with Framer mini-series, for me this whole movement started with a product called Facebook Home. Okay, so you guys probably remember released in 2013, Facebook Home was a weird product. It wasn't an app and it wasn't an OS. It was kind of an Android theme that would replace Android's lock screen and home screen with your Facebook's newsfeed and friends, right? But the relevant part of Facebook Home, relevant to this subject, of course, was that it was very strong in interaction design. The now popular chat heads that you can see in almost every Facebook app nowadays. It was developed initially for Facebook Home, and Facebook's designers prototyped the whole idea using, you guessed it, Quartz Composer. This was the first time I've become familiar with the tool, and I played with it for a while, but even then it was an abandoned piece of software with a very steep learning curve. So Facebook decided to fix this, and last year they released kind of a plugin for Quartz Composer, and they call it Origami. Origami brought a lot of the modern elements that designers need nowadays in the form of custom patches, and even updated the app's UI, like Retina support, for example, which was very much needed. Now, this year, Facebook released a second version of Origami with a lot of new features such as revamped scroll, swipe, and taps components, new presentation styles, code export for iOS, Android, and the web, which is pretty cool, sketch support, and live preview on iOS. All right, so enough of this history class. Let's take a look at how it actually works. So in Origami's website, if you click on download Origami, they will tell you what I'm about to, which is how you can actually install Origami and start using it. It's not just a single download. So to install Quartz Composer, first you'll have to register as an Apple developer. If you haven't yet, you can follow the links either on Facebook's Origami page or in the show notes. So right below, you can start by doing that if you haven't before. To register as an Apple developer is not that Apple developer program for iOS or Mac that you might have heard, the paid one. So this is actually free. So there's no costs involved here. So after you register as an Apple developer, you have to download and install Quartz Composer, okay? And only then you can install Origami. So you have these 3 steps, 2 if you haven't, or none if you already have it. So you have to do that. Again, all the links in the show notes. This is pretty easy and quick. So after you're all set up, you can finally start using it, okay? Now, to launch the app, you have to launch Quartz Composer and not Origami. Confusing, I know, but think of Origami as like a plugin for Quartz Composer and not actually a full-blown app, okay? So I'm going to do just that. So I'm opening Quartz Composer, and you get this new choose from template screen, very familiar to any Apple software. But what you want to do is, never mind this, you go to the menu bar, you click on File, and you select New Origami File, okay? That's what you want. So when you do that, you can close this one. When you do that, you can see the UI already. So we have two main windows, okay? One is the editor, so where you're actually going to use it, and then on the right you have like the viewer, like the live preview thing, okay? So I'm just gonna make them like real big so we can actually see something. There you go, that should be enough. And so this is Origami's UI, and it can be a little confusing. So as I mentioned, you have patches. So, and you manipulate the app by connecting patches to one another, okay? Which can sound a little confusing, but bear with me. Okay, so in the canvas, if you will, you have some patches, 3 patches already here, okay? And on the live preview viewer thing, you can see that we have this iPhone 6. So that's, we already have something. And if we inspect it, so we have something that is called viewer size, right? And it says type iPhone 6. So you can, and if you double click on it says iPhone 6, you can select other devices, okay? So this is new. You can select iPhone 5, and they have Android, Windows Phone, iPads, and even an Apple Watch, if you want to try that out. So I'm going to stick with iPhone 6 for now, okay? Below the type, you have orientation. So again, you can double click, and it says portrait or landscape. Pretty easy. And then you have pixels wide and pixels high, which are connected with this little orangey thing to pixels height of this layer group, okay? This may seem all foreign. And then we have another thing called viewer, which has an image, okay? By the way, a quick disclaimer, you're gonna hear some background noise right now, and that's actually the fans of my computer. I've waited a little bit to see if it would settle down, but it's not. So, first lesson, Origami in Quartz Composer is very power hog, and it can make your computer slow. I've experienced that. So there you go. I really apologize for that. There's really nothing I can do right now. So before we continue, let's take a look at the UI real quick. Okay, so as I said, we have 2 windows, the viewer and the main window. On the main window, we have the patch library, which has a list icon. So if you click there, something new. I'm going to be talking about that later. Zoom levels, we create macros, parameters, patch inspector, and the viewer, which is just a button to, if you close the viewer right here, you can click on this button. So the parameters are like the inspector view on a lot of other Apple apps, and it's something that I like to keep around. So if you click there, you can see you have this new sidebar on the right, and if you select some layers, some patches, you can see the thing that I double click on right here to change some settings. Well, you can do that right in the parameter on this sidebar, and I find it useful. But if you don't, you can do everything just clicking the patches itself. So okay, we have a viewer, and we have which only has an image and has enable or not. So if you uncheck that, you can see already what it's doing. It's basically this image. Okay, it's pretty cool. And the viewer size, we set that, and the layer group. Just notice that there's some differences right here. Okay, both of these patches have rounded corners. So if I zoom in a little bit right here, you can see this has rounded corners, and this one hasn't. So this is a interesting way to differentiate elements just by the corner radius. But what this is doing is the ones that don't have rounded corners, they're actually a macro. So it's basically like a folder. Okay, so if we double click on that folder, not on the name, if we double click on the folder, we've entered the folder. Okay, so the whole UI we lost every elements that we had before, but don't worry, this little button right here says edit parent, If you click there, you go up in the hierarchy, so we come out of the folder, if that even makes sense. So everything that you want to do, okay, is inside this layer group. Okay, so just think of these other two as basically the bezel, right? The frame of what you're going to do. Okay, so everything you're doing is actually inside this, which is the screen itself. And we have one patch, okay? They named it fill layer. And if you see here on the inspector, you can see that the fill layer has a color and an opacity and enable disable, okay? If we start messing around with this, so we have color, and if we change the color, just, I don't know, to a light blue, you can see that the color of the iPhone on the viewer changes. That's pretty cool. And the opacity, well, you guessed it, change the opacity, okay? So now we're talking. We have a tiny grasp of what a patch is, okay? So how do we actually add elements to this? Well, remember the patch library? Yep, that's it. So the patch library has a ton of patches, useful patches for you. And patches is everything, not just like layers, like graphic layers. You have patches for interaction, patches for animation, patches for custom patches for scrollable layers and draggable layers and all of that. So you have a huge library of elements that you can and should use, right? And Origami, so Facebook, they created a bunch of patches for this. So in the dropdown, you can just select Origami, and for the most part, this will be more than enough for whatever you want to do. But if you want to, create something way more hardcore, well, there's a ton of patches. Because keep in mind that Quartz Composer wasn't made for just for like interaction design. Okay, this is made to create custom graphical screensavers for Mac and all that crazy mumbo jumbo. So Origami was kind enough just to give us a hand and save a lot of trouble. So, okay, so if we scroll here through the library, you can see they have border, bouncy animations, cursor controls. You have a lot of stuff, and you can and should just look at, read the description, see what it does. So whatever you're looking for, just be a little bit adventurous and see what they have. Okay, so right now I'm not going to go talk about every patch. That would be crazy and super boring. So what I'm going to do is just try to explain how the basics work, okay? So we already have some concepts. If I want to add an element here, okay, let's say a button that I previously drawed in Sketch, and this is just one single shape, okay, just a rounded square, okay? If you have a PNG, you can just drag that PNG into a Quartz Composer window, okay? And there we go, already have something. Let's take a look at what it did. You can see already the layer on the iPhone screen. Okay, so we have this shape, which is an image, and that's the image that I just dragged. But then we have a layer patch. Okay, layer patches are like the most common patches probably, and the ones that are easier to grasp. So we have an image, and it's connected with this little spaghetti thing to the image property of the layer. I hope this is not confusing, okay? So try to follow along. So if we actually disconnect, so I click there and I disconnected that little patch, okay? We no longer see the image, right? So that's how you connect patches to one another. So if I, again, click on the image little circle and drag it to this image, there we go. There it is again. So let's select this layer patch, see what we have. Again, the enable, disable. That's, as far as I'm concerned, I think that's on all patches. We have the anchor point. We can change the anchor point from the center to, top left, top right, bottom left, all of that. We have X position and have just a bunch of zeros. So X, Y, Z, X rotation, Y rotation, width, height, color, opacity, and scale. I think we can all grasp what this will do, right? So if I change this X position to, let's say, 100, it moved on the X axis 100 points, right? So This is a little bit different from Framer. So Framer would, the coordinate system, it would be, so the point 0, 0 would be the top left corner of the viewer. And on Origami, the 0, 0 is the center of the layer, right? So if you want it to move to the right, you increase with increase the value, and if you want to make to the right, just make that a negative number, and we'll go to the left, right? I think I messed it up. Same thing for the Y, so 100, like so. Let's make it bigger. Z position, not really important right now. X rotation, so we can rotate it on the x-axis, which is kind of weird already. I think what you're looking for, the classic rotation, is the Z rotation. So we have the width, and we can change that, right? Same thing for the height. And a color, opacity, and scale. Well, scale, just like Framer, if you scale it, we'll just multiply the width and height. So I'm gonna make that the default again. Okay. And again, then we have the image. If you look out here, we have mask image, and some stuff that we are not going to talk about right now. So let's start by just doing a very basic interaction. So what I want to do is, when I click on the square, I want it to shrink it a little bit, okay? And let's start by just figuring out how to shrink it. So if we go to scale and we say like, okay, it's going to be 0.5, it's going to make it twice as small, right? So there you go. Okay, so we want maybe 0.8. That's what I want to do. Okay. So what we need is an interaction patch. Okay. So again, if we go to patch library, or if we hit the keyboard shortcut command return, that's the same thing as pressing the little icon up here. So if we look for an interaction patch, so I'm going to the Y. There you go, interaction 2. Never mind the 2. Okay, that's what we want. So we double click there, and bam, we have an interaction patch. So a new patch. Let's take a look at what this has. So quick little thing. So we have properties on the left and properties on the right. So what this is every interaction on the left is an input, and on the right is an output. Okay, makes sense? Cool. So let's see what we have. So we have interaction, down, up, tap, and drag. And as you figured, that's the... What happened here? Okay, sorry. So that's the tap. So, okay, so or click. So when you're down is when you're clicking down, up when you release, in this case, the mouse. Just a tap, or if you're dragging, okay? So this is going to output a value, and if we hover there, we can see that the type is a boolean and the value is false by default. Okay, so true, false, you can also convert to 1 and 0. Okay, so let's just try that. If we connect the down little property, again, click there and drag to the scale, which is what we want to change, something happened because it disappeared. Okay. And if you see here, scale is 0. Okay, that's not what we want, and we can't change it now. It's grayed out. So why? Well, because the scale property right now, it's not manually changeable, because now it's related to the down. So remember when you hover this, the default value is false, and I told you that false converts to 0. So that's this little 0 right here. Okay, so if we click on it, which I know we can't see, but if I click on it, suddenly the scale value changes to 1. Okay, if you look here, or here, if I click, the scale value changes to 1. So it's actually doing something, and that's cool. Well, that's cool, but that's not what we want, right? If anything, we want the opposite. We want it to decrease. So what can we do? We have to add another patch, and that's the solution to everything. So what we want is a patch called transition. Okay, so again, command return. Let's go to the patch library, and I'm gonna look for the transition one, and there you are. Transition takes a number in the range of 0 to 1 and converts it to a range starting with start value and ending with end value. That's exactly what we want. So double click. Okay, I have to close this. And we have this new patch called transition. And as I told you, on the left is the input. So it will take progress, right? Take a start and end value, and it's going to output that value. It's not confusing, believe me. So I'm going to connect this down to the progress, okay, and disconnect it from a little layer. So the progress is going to be between 0 and 1, right? And it's going to change from the start to the end value, and we can change that. So remember that I said that I wanted to shrink from a scale of 1 to 0.8. So the start value is going to be 1, and the end value is going to be 0.8, right? And the output is going to be either 1 or 0.8. That's it. So I'm going to connect this value to the scale. Okay? So that's cool. So now when I click, it shrinks from 1 to 0.8. So that's exactly what I want. So that's super cool and all, but it's very poor animation, right? Just switches instantly from one value to the other. And that's not very good to look at. So what can we do? Remember the solution, another patch. And this patch is called animation, which is easy to figure out. So, by the way, you can just type to search. Yay, pro tip. So we have pop animation, classy animation, and bouncy animation, right? And if you're not familiar with the terms, well, the best way is actually to try it out and see. I mean, I think you're familiar with it. So I want a bouncy animation, okay? So double click, it's in my canvas. Let's see how it looks like. So we have the inputs, you have a number, friction, tension, and a progress, okay? So what I can tell you already is it will take the number, that whatever number you fit it in, and is going to animate, instead of just instantly changing from one value to the other. It's going to take a number, is going to animate it throughout time, basically. So let's start that. Let's try it out. So I'm going to take the value from the transition, I'm going to unplug it from the scale, and I'm going to plug it to the number in the bounce animation, okay? And just like that, I'm not going to tweak the values of friction and tension for now. They're good. I trust Facebook's designers. And I'm going to connect the progress to the scale, okay? Whoa, something happened already. So when I click, it shrinks down, and when I release, it shrinks up, right? That's pretty cool. Okay, now it's looking better, okay? But okay, one last thing. I don't want to have to be pressing it down, okay? I want to click once and it changes, it shrinks, and I click it one more time and it grows back, okay? So, can you guess the solution? Yeah, we need another patch. And developers are very familiar with this term. Designers, you probably are too. And by R2, I don't mean the Star Wars robot, I mean you are too. Okay, so it's called a switch, okay? So let's search for switch. That's cool. We have two switches, index switch and switch. So switch, if you read the description, says toggles between on and off and remembers its current state. Done. That's what I need. So I want to switch to, say, okay, on, meaning now shrink, off, okay, go back. Okay? So it takes a flip, and if we hover on flip, it's a Boolean. So every time something changes, it flips, okay? And if you connect something to the flip, for example, this interaction, so instead of pressing it down, I say when I tap, I want this to switch, okay? And it's going to take that on and off, which is going to be Boolean or 0 to 1, right? Which is the same thing that we are feeding this transition patch. So I'm going to spaghetti thing and connect it to this one. And let me just rearrange this. It's kind of a little messy, which, hey, is going to be, you're going to be very familiar with this messiness. Drives me nuts. But okay, so it switches, okay, from on to off. So when I tap, whoop, something happens. So every time I tap, the switch is going to switch it if it's on to off, if it's off to on, and it's going to feed the same, basically it's the same value that we were feeding through the interaction. And there you go. So you tap once, it grows, taps twice, taps another time, and it shrinks. That's pretty cool, right? And you can already play with this. So instead of scale, let's say I'm gonna feed it. I'm gonna connect this to the X position, okay? And if we tap, nothing really is changing. And why? Well, because the values that we are feeding it, it's from 1 to 0.8. So such tiny values for X position that we can really see anything. So the start value can be 0, and let's say the end value is going to be 300. Ooh, right? And now you can see something, right? Yay. It's alive. Okay. One last thing. You see these little numbers here, which they're not on every patch, but if you are paying attention, you can see that it's only on the layers patches, right? So it's 1 and 2. What happens if I tap there? You see a drop down. Okay, layer 1, layer 2. If I select another one, suddenly it disappeared. And this is nothing more, nothing less than the index level. Okay, so the higher the number, the more in front it is, if that makes sense. So right now we can see the square because it's below the fill layer. Okay, pretty easy, right? Okay, just one last thing that I wanted to get rid of and just throw it out there. And okay, so we have patches. We have tons of patches. We know how we can switch values from states, if you will. We know how to transition stuff, and we have animations, bouncy and pop ones, right? Okay, so I think this is enough for the first part in the series. Second part is already available, so I'm gonna just remember the little prototype iOS thingy that I did for Framer. I'm gonna do exactly the same thing for comparisons. I'm going to do the exact same thing on Origami. Very simple, scrollable, buttons, bouncing back and forth, and that's it. But I suggest if this is the first time you are seeing this, I suggest before you go to part 2 to install it, set it all together, open a project, and just go through the layers that you have and just explore. I really recommend people doing that. That's something that I do every time I get a new app or a new tool or a new whatever. I just want to go free, go nuts, and see what I can do. Okay, guys, see you in a bit. I hope. Bye.